This is the Hoka Rocket X3, and it looks a lot like the Hoka Cielo X1 2.0. So what's the difference between these two shoes, and why do they each exist? It's time to lace up the Rocket X3 and take it for a run. Yo, what's going on? My name is Kafuzi and I'm a non-elite runner who reviews running shoes here on YouTube. And today I want to talk to you guys all about the Hoka Rocket X3. But before I give my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. There's a pair of shoes that Hoka sent to me for the purpose of review, so I didn't have to pay for these shoes. However, nobody's paying me to make this video or to include their brand in this video, and no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Hoka Rocket X3, and let's start with the specs. There's a 42 millimeters of stack height in the heel with a 7 millimeter drop, giving us 35 millimeters of stack height in the forefoot. And we got three different components in this shoe. We've got two different densities of supercritical Puma midsole foam, and then in between that top and bottom layer we have a winged carbon fiber plate, and we could see part of that wing peeking out on the side of this shoe here. And usually when you see one of these kind of like lateral windows to the carbon fiber plate, it means that the carbon fiber plate is curling up in order to create that thing for you to even be able to see. And the reason why they have that curl up is because it's there to prevent the shoe from tipping over too far to that side. So it's a stabilizing element. Now I had a chance to see what the carbon fiber plate itself looks like when I visited the Hoka booth at the Chicago Marathon Expo recently. And you could see from the exploded version of the shoe that the carbon fiber plate has a big scoop to it. And you can kind of also see that scoop, or at least the angle of that scoop, if you look at the window in the bottom of the shoe, where you get a chance to see that the plate starts really far up in the back of the shoe and then gets really close down to the ground as you get closer to that forefoot. And then it scoops down underneath the pads of your foot to create that spoon shaped design. And that's the design that we see in a lot of shoes that are trying to be a little bit more stable as far as racing shoes go. And generally that kind of plate position indicates that it's probably going to be more beneficial for heel strikers. Now, the other thing that we see in the construction of this shoe is that there is like a mid to rear foot active foot frame is what Hoka is calling it. And that's where the foam comes up over the bottom of your foot in order to create some side walls for the foams to be able to hold your foot into place again, so that your foot's not sliding around too much as your foot is hitting the ground as part of your normal running gait cycle. In other words, there's another stabilizing element to this shoe. Now, protecting all of this midsole foam, we have a couple of pads of rubber, one skid on each side of the heel, and then you pretty much have two kind of canyon walls of foam as you go from the heel towards the forefoot of the shoe. And then we have kind of a larger area of rubber in the forefoot that's split along this channel that goes through pretty much the center of the shoe. And then we get one more additional window to that carbon fiber plate. And you can see here just how close that carbon fiber plate is to the ground when you're up by the toes. Now, in all the materials that Hoka has put out about this shoe, they keep mentioning that this rubber is a sticky rubber. And that, I think, is to address the concerns from last version Rocket X2, where some people had some issues with the shoe being a little bit slippery. I didn't think it was too much of a problem. I did feel like the rubber was a bit dense in version 2, and in version 3 it looks like they've softened the rubber up, which is going to aid in some of the tackiness and grip of that rubber. Moving to the upper, we have what Hoka is calling their single layer warp knit, and to me it's kind of like a wire mesh kind of material. It's a single layer of it, and it's not the softest of materials, but it is very strong and very airy, so it's going to be able to keep your foot locked into place even at speed, even if you're taking tight corners. But there's plenty of ventilation for air to cool your feet so they're not getting too clammy inside. And the material overall has this translucent type of quality where you can kind of see through the upper. Moving to the tongue, they've gotten rid of the gusset, and they're saying that that is to aid in the ease of getting your foot into the shoe. And I know a lot of triathletes tend to reach for a lot of Hoka product. And so maybe that does make sense if you're coming off the bike. But for me, removing the gusset just kind of means that this tongue is floating around a little bit. And overall, this tongue feels just kind of a little bit goofy and out of place to me. It doesn't feel like the kind of tongue that you would see on a racing shoe. It's a little bit too tall and it's a little bit too floppy for me, but it never actually became a problem as I was running. So maybe it's just a matter of preference. The laces that they're using on this shoe are the frilly kind. So that's going to make sure that these shoes don't get untied. And I generally enjoy seeing those on my shoes. And up front, there is a bit of stretchiness. It's not quite the kind of stretchy vamp that you'd be familiar with if you've been running a lot of Hoka trail shoes. And I love those stretchy vamps that they have, but there is a little bit of stretchiness up here, which is going to make the shoe a little bit more comfortable. Moving to the heel cup, we've got a generous amount of padding if you think about it from the perspective of race shoes, but overall it's not too much. It doesn't get in the way. There's just enough in there to make sure that it's comfortable as your heel is seated inside the shoe. There is a little bit of structure to this heel cup, but I think most of the structure that you're going to be feeling is from that active foot frame and the sidewalls that the foam is creating. And they've gone to great lengths to make sure that there isn't anything on the inside of the shoe that's going to create any sort of abrasion or discomfort. And all the stitching you can see is on that back, on the outside of the shoe. Hoka's been giving the weights for their shoes in a US men's size 10 for a little while now, and I'm a reference size US men's size 9, so whenever I do a video, I'm always trying to give you the same size shoe and the weight that corresponds to that. So when I put my US men's size 9 on the scale, my shoes came in at a measured weight of 7.3 ounces and 208 grams. Now that we talked about what this shoe is like on paper, let's talk about what it's like on the road. I feel like the Rocket X3 is a nice little update from the previous version. While there isn't a drastic change between these two shoes in terms of how they're set up and who they're ideally suited for, I feel like the foams that they're using in Rocket X3 are a little bit lighter, a little bit springier, and there's less denseness to the shoe than what I felt in the Rocket X2. But I will have to say that I just don't think that the Rocket X series of shoes is a shoe that's intended for me. I feel like this shoe is ideally suited for a heel striker or any other runner who is looking for a bit more stability in their race product. If you look at the way that Hoka itself talks about this shoe, they mention the word stability numerous times. And by looking at the way that the shoe is set up, from the plate position, the wing on the side of the shoe, to the way that the foams are set up in the shoe, I think it's all more ideally suited for a runner who's not me. What does that mean? What do I mean by that? I feel like the shoe has really nice materials. I like the choices of supercritical foams I have in here. I like the inclusion of that carbon fiber plate. I think the upper materials are, for the most part, well chosen and well crafted. As far as fit goes, I went with my usual running shoe size, and I felt like it was a bit narrow and a bit short, but not so much that I'd recommend that people size up. So I felt like all the pieces were well put together. I just felt like for me, when I took it on a long run where I had a big chunk of marathon effort miles, I felt like the shoe didn't feel special to me. It just didn't feel like it was working for me. It wanted me to run in more of a heel striking fashion. That's when I felt like the shoe felt the most special. But that's not a way that my body really likes to run. So I felt like I was constantly fighting the shoe at some of those, I guess, slower paces, marathon pace. When I sped things up though, that's when things started to get a little bit more interesting in the shoe. When I did threshold mile repeats, I'm turning over a little bit faster and I'm spending even more time just purely on the forefoot of the shoe. While it didn't feel like a soft, cushioned, and bouncy experience like I normally expect in the racing shoes that I would normally reach for, I did feel like, all right, I'm feeling the carbon, I'm feeling the elevated foams that they're using in the shoe, and it feels nice, but I do have to really focus on how I'm hitting the shoe. If I start to lean back and land midfoot to heel on the shoe, then I feel like the shoe wants me to do something different. And again, I feel like the shoe and I aren't getting along. So as I'm turning over very quickly, I can get along with the shoe, but as I'm getting into more of like marathon effort paces or even slower, that's where I feel like the shoe becomes really assertive and wants me to run a certain way, and that's a way that I don't like. And so I feel like this is a shoe that just wasn't set up for the way I run, and it's definitely set up for a different kind of runner. And I think we can contrast that to what's going on this Cielo X1 2.0. I think that both of these shoes are using dual density supercritical Puma foams, but they're playing with how much of each of the densities of foams that there are and where they're emphasizing which foam should be more prominent. Both of these shoes have wings in the carbon fiber plates, and they both have very aggressive plate positions that start high in the heel and then scoop low underneath the pads of the foot. And so that's why I feel like the Cielo X1 2.0 isn't exactly a forefoot striker shoe. It strikes me more as like a pure midfoot striker shoe, but I can get along with that because it's closer to kind of what I would ideally prefer. I think if they kept that plate position really high, it'd be a pure forefoot striker shoe, but I don't think that's really what they were going for in the Cielo X1 2.0. So for me, while these two shoes kind of look very similar, the way that the active foot frames are or aren't present in the shoe and where they're putting which density of foam in the shoe, I think really dictates for which shoe which runner should choose. If you're a heel striker, I'd say go with the Rocket X3. If you are a midfoot or forefoot striker, I'd say go with the Cielo X1 2.0. Now, before we wrap up this video, let's take a moment to zoom out and see where the Rocket X3 fits within the broader Hoka lineup. And I feel like now Hoka has made two kind of distinct lines that are really starting to make a lot of sense to me. And it's been a journey. It's taken a while for me to really get a good grasp on what Hoka is really doing, because every year, the Rocket X has been so different. Rocket X2 was drastically different from Rocket X1. Those in turn were drastically different from the three different Carbon X shoes that we saw. And that in turn was different than the Carbon Rocket. So it's been a journey. I feel like now things are settling into place. Let's talk about how I'm seeing the Hoka lineup. The first shoe I want to talk about is the Daily Trainer. The best known one from Hoka is the Clifton. This is the Clifton 10. This is the kind of shoe that you would use for most of your runs, most of your days. This is using a compression molded EVA. It's pretty much the same shoe it's been for a really long time. The last version was a little bit of an outlier. I love that one. Now we're getting back to kind of what the Clifton has always been, just that tried and true kind of everyday shoe, maybe a touch on the boring side, but this is where that fits in the lineup. And then for max cushion, we've got the Bondi, which is another pillar, not only in running and in max cushion, but in the Hoka lineup as well. That's a shoe that you reach for when you need a little bit more cushion and want a little bit more comfort than what you got on the daily training side. And then from the racing side, I think we've got the Cielo X1 2.0. I feel like these three shoes are going to make for a really nice lineup. Now, the one shoe that's missing from these three shoes in terms of making a Hoka rotation is probably one of my favorite Hoka franchises, and that's the Mach. This is the Mach 6. I would normally think about this shoe as kind of an alternative to the Clifton, a little bit more agile, a little bit faster of a shoe. Then you'd go with the Mach 6. But for today's purposes, I'm gonna put this kind of as a faster daily training shoe, not quite a tempo workout shoe, but as a faster daily training shoe. And hopefully as we start going through the rest of these shoes, it'll start to make sense. Now let's put these shoes over here on the side. And I feel like for the most part, these are kind of like the very neutral shoes in the Hoka lineup. I might start to think about these as midfoot / forefoot striker shoes, but basically I think at the base of it all, they're all very neutral shoes. Now, that's where the X series of shoes really starts to come in. And I think that across from each one of these shoes is a stabilized version of this same shoe that exists in the Hoka lineup. So across from the Bondi, we have what I thought should have been called the Bondi X, but because there is a Bondi X already, I thought this would be called Bondi X2, but instead they're calling it the Skyward X. They're using upgraded foam, some Puma foam in there, some supercritical foam in there, and there's a carbon fiber H plate for stability, not necessarily for propulsion, but it's a big, tall, squishy shoe that's very comfortable. Some people can run very fast in it. I'm not one of those people, but if you're looking for something that's a little bit more stabilized than a Bondi, then I'd say go with the Skyward X. And then across from the Mach, we have the Mach X3. And I feel like this is kind of a stabilized version of the Mach. I don't feel like it's a faster version of it just because there is a plate in this one. It does have a winged plate. And then across from the Clifton, this shoe isn't an X shoe because there isn't carbon in it, but it's kind of related to the Skyward X. This is the Sky Flow. And I feel like this is a lightly stabilized Clifton, basically. I feel like the shoes look the same. They have a lot of the same concepts going on in terms of how they're approaching daily training. They are workhorse kinds of shoes that you're going to use every day for most of your runs, most of the days of the week, and maybe are a little bit on the boring side, but I feel like it's a slightly more stable version of what you're getting in the Clifton. And then finally, this is where the Rocket X3 comes in. I feel like it is an alternative to the Cielo X1 2.0 or a stabilized version of that. Other way to look at it is that it is a heel striker shoe, whereas the Cielo X1 2.0 is that midfoot / forefoot striker shoe. And so this, I think, is the two lines of shoes that I think Hoka is putting together. They have their regular neutral shoes, and then they have their X or stabilized shoes that are on this side that provide a counterpoint to all of the major pillars in the Hoka lineup. But if you need a little bit more stability, I'd say look to this side.
You're the sunshine on my mind. We're burning through the city of lights.
Now let's wrap up this video by going over the buying guide, and we'll also discuss some alternatives. The Hoka Rocket X3 is a light and snappy race day shoe, ideally suited for heel strikers or any runner looking for a bit more stability in their race day shoe. This shoe retails now for $250, which I think is a very good price for what you're getting here. If you're looking to save a couple of bucks, I think that you can probably drop back to the Rocket X2. It is a little bit heavier and it is a bit denser of an experience. I think that's the best way that I can really explain the differences between these two shoes, but I think you are going to be able to save a couple of bucks. And if you are that heel striking runner looking for a little bit more stability in the race shoe, I think both of these shoes will be able to suit you well. I don't think Hoka has any more inventory of this shoe left, but I have been able to find it for under $190 from some other reputable running store websites. Now, let's take a look at some of the competition on the marketplace to see where the Rocket X3 and its $250 price tag stack up. I think the first shoe that I think about when I think about heel striker marathon shoes comes from Puma, and this is the Deviate Nitro Elite 3. Even though I'm not a heel striker, this is a shoe that I find that I can enjoy. Now, while I don't know that I would love this shoe for a marathon distance, I feel like for me as a forefoot striker, I still really like it for, say, half marathon racing or running at around that kind of slightly faster than marathon type of pacing. And I think the reason for that is the foam that they're using in the shoe. They're using an aliphatic TPU, and that is kind of my favorite new buzzword in running these days. When aliphatic TPU or ATPU is put into a race product, it is almost invariably a shoe that I'm going to like. But the plate here has a high position in the back that scoops down low, and it kind of gives you that wedge shape in the back that I think is really nice for heel strikers that are hitting back at the heel of the shoe and then rolling forward as they snap into that next stride. It's also an extremely lightweight shoe, one of the lightest shoes that I've ever tested, so very fun to be able to run in. And I don't know how they're doing this, but that shoe has always retailed for $230. I guess that's why it's really hard to find in stock, but if you can find a pair in your size, I think it's definitely worth picking up at $230. Between the two, I would go with the Deviate Nitro Elite 3. Now, the other shoe that I think is ideally suited for heel strikers comes from ASICS, and this is the Metaspeed Edge Tokyo. Now, this is a shoe that has a sibling shoe that looks very similar, but is also very different. I guess Hoka has stepped into the same problem that ASICS created with the Metaspeed series. There's the Metaspeed Edge, and then its sibling, the Metaspeed Sky. I think the Metaspeed Sky is a shoe that I prefer as the forefoot striker shoe, and then the Metaspeed Edge is the heel striker shoe. It's using dual density foams. It's using a carbon fiber plate that starts out high and then scoops down low. It's using a very stripped down, lightweight upper. A lot of the same words I'll use to describe what's going on in the Rocket X3. Both of these shoes are going to be really great for heel strikers at marathon effort. And of all the shoes that I've talked about today, I'd say that the Metaspeed Edge has the broadest appeal as a shoe that heel strikers and forefoot strikers can run well in. And I think that's because of the two types of foams that they use. One of the main foams that they're using in the Metaspeed Edge is aliphatic TPU. You are paying for that performance and lightness in this shoe though, because the Metaspeed Edge Tokyo comes in at a tariff inflated price of $270. So quite a bit of a premium over the Nitro Elite 3 and a little bit more expensive than the Rocket X3. And I'd say if I were to line up these three shoes, the way that I would look at them is, I think all of these are going to be really great for heel strikers. And I think the way that you would pick between them is by how much stability you want in the shoe. I'd say the Rocket X3 is the most stable and the Metaspeed Edge is the least stable, even amongst heel strikers. And then for forefoot strikers, I probably really wouldn't look at any of these shoes for you. But if I were to look at it, I would say I would use the Metaspeed Edge Tokyo for a marathon, the Deviate Nitro Elite 3 for a half marathon or shorter, and then the Rocket X3 maybe for some tough workouts. So that's how I understand the Hoka Rocket X3. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any other questions, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do Mondays and Thursdays over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel. I'd love to see you guys over there in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?